The alert hits first. Not a whisper, not a rumor, but a scream. Mass protests. Hundreds killed. Cities on fire. The words blur together as screens light up across the world, each notification more alarming than the last. Tehran. Isfahan. Shiraz. Streets flooded with people, then flooded with blood. Sirens wail, gunfire cracks, and the night sky glows orange as if the earth itself is burning in protest. And then the image cuts. Air Force One.
Calm. Polished.
Controlled. The most powerful man on the planet seated beneath soft cabin lights, speaking with the confidence of someone who knows the weight of every word he drops. Donald Trump looks straight ahead and says the United States is weighing very strong options. Not diplomatic language. Not abstract warnings. Options that include military action. Options that redraw borders and end lives. Options that do not get unsaid once spoken. Two worlds collide in real time. On one side, Iranian citizens running through smoke-filled streets, clutching flags, clutching each other, chanting for dignity while armed forces move in with ruthless precision. Young faces twisted with fear and defiance. Mothers screaming names that echo unanswered. On the other side, American command centers hum with quiet intensity. Generals lean over digital maps. Satellites track movement. Red dots blink. Decisions are no longer theoretical. This is not history. This is now. Social media fractures instantly. Some call it overdue accountability. Others whisper the word everyone is afraid to say out loud. War. Immigrants watch with a special kind of dread, knowing these headlines are not abstractions, but echoes of stories they fled, scars their families still carry. For them, this is not foreign policy. This is memory knocking at the door. Trump's words ripple outward, crossing oceans in seconds. Tehran hears them. Washington feels them. The world pauses, holding its breath, asking the same unspoken question. This ruling doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to the moment the country collectively leaned forward and realized the ground was moving beneath it. Because when federal marshals enforce a fraud judgment at this scale, markets don't just react, they recalibrate. Investors pause. Banks reassess risk. Insurance models flicker red. The unspoken assumption that certain names are too big to challenge quietly dissolves, and with it goes a sense of artificial certainty that had propped up more than one balance sheet for years. On trading floors and financial news panels, the language is careful but tense. Exposure. Precedent. Contagion. No one wants to say the quiet part out loud, but everyone feels it. If branding can no longer mask reality, then valuation itself becomes suspect. And that tremor doesn't stay confined to spreadsheets. It moves outward, into pensions, into housing markets, into the everyday anxieties of people already stretched thin by inflation, rent, and broken promises. Politically, the country fractures in real time. Voters don't just disagree. They interpret different realities. To some, this is long overdue accountability. To others, it's framed as persecution. The divide hardens not because of facts, but because of identity. Who you believe this affect says more about where you stand than any party label ever could. Cable news fills the gap with urgency and speculation. Panels argue over intent instead of outcome. Sharon's flash words like historic and dangerous in the same breath. Social media accelerates the split, rewarding outrage over reflection, certainty over nuance. Every reaction becomes content. Every post another brick in a wall separating Americans watching the same event through different lenses. Trust erodes faster than truth can catch up. What's striking is who isn't speaking. Former allies who once rushed to microphones now issue statements so bland they barely qualify as sentences. Silence becomes strategy. The empire did not rise quietly. It announced itself in gold, in slogans, in superlatives stacked so high they blurred into mythology. From the beginning, the promise was simple and seductive. Unmatched success, unmatched intelligence, unmatched dominance. Buildings weren't just built, they were branded. Deals weren't negotiated, they were conquered. Reality was secondary to projection, and projection was everything. Television amplified the image. Cameras loved confidence, especially the kind that never hesitated. The narrative hardened into folklore. The master dealmaker, the genius who bent markets to his will, the outsider who knew the game better than the people who wrote the rules. Failure was edited out. Doubt was dismissed as jealousy. The audience learned to confuse volume with validity, repetition with truth. Over time, the branding became armor. Lavish properties weren't just assets, they were symbols meant to intimidate scrutiny.
Gold fixture whispered permanence.
Logos suggested inevitability. The message was always the same: this empire exists because it deserves to exist. Success proved itself, and proof required no examination. Public claims grew bolder as the spotlight widened. Valuations soared in speeches and interviews. Numbers floated upward without friction, detached from context, untethered from verification. What mattered wasn't precision, but persuasion. If enough people believed the figure, it might as well be real. The mythology thrived on that logic because it rewarded confidence and punished hesitation. Supporters repeated the story with pride. Critics were waved away as bitter or biased. Institutions, slow and cautious by design, appeared irrelevant next to a brand that moved at the speed of spectacle. The louder the empire spoke, the more it felt insulated. Accountability seemed outdated, almost quaint, in the face of relentless self-assurance. There is no single face to the hero of the story, no soaring speeches or signature catchphrases. The hero here doesn't campaign, doesn't posture, doesn't demand belief. It works quietly, methodically, almost invisibly, powered not by charisma, but by repetition. It is the rule of law, and its strength has never been spectacle. Its strength is endurance. Long before cameras arrived at locked gates, the work had already begun. Investigators sat in fluorescent-lit rooms, staring at spreadsheets that refused to tell dramatic stories. They compared numbers that didn't match and timelines that didn't align. No applause followed these moments. No audience waited. Just hours turning into days, days into months, and persistence becoming its own form of courage. Documents piled up, not as symbols, but as burdens. Valuations here, loan applications there, statements repeated across years, each one quietly preserved.
The work was tedious by design.
Systems built to slow things down so nothing important slips through. Every claim checked twice, sometimes 3 times, because mistakes don't just undermine cases, they undermine trust itself. Judges entered this process not as warriors, but as stewards. Their role was never to win, only to weigh, to separate assertion from proof, to ensure that emotion never outran evidence. They spoke through orders, through schedules, through patience that frustrated anyone hoping for drama. In a culture addicted to immediacy, delay became a form of discipline. Juries, when summoned, didn't arrive as partisans or spectators. They arrived as citizens, asked to suspend assumptions and listen longer than comfort allows.
To sit with complexity.
To accept that truth often emerges not in moments, but in accumulation. Their silence carried weight, because silence meant attention, and attention is rare in a system designed to provoke reaction. What makes this process powerful is not perfection. It is restraint.
No insults. No retaliation.
As the case moves forward, the temperature rises everywhere except where it matters most. Outside the courthouse, rhetoric sharpens. Statements grow longer, angrier, more theatrical. Every filing becomes a talking point. Every procedural step is reframed as proof of conspiracy or persecution. Cameras capture performances meant to reassure supporters and intimidate critics, turning legal process into political theater. Inside, the air is different. Cooler. Quieter. Motions are filed not for applause, but for record. Arguments are measured, timed, constrained by rules that refuse to bend to outrage. The courtroom does not reward volume. It rewards coherence. And that difference begins to show. Defense teams push aggressively, challenging scope, questioning intent, casting doubt wherever possible. The language is sharp, technical, relentless. They argue context, interpretation, misunderstanding. They insist numbers are subjective, that valuations are art, not science. Each motion is a move on the board, designed to stall, distract, or force an error. The response is unglamorous, but devastatingly steady. Evidence tightens.
Timelines align.
Claims are answered not with counterclaims, but with exhibits. When a figure is questioned, another document appears. When a justification is offered, a prior statement resurfaces. The strategy is not to overwhelm, but to narrow. To reduce the battlefield until there is nowhere left to maneuver. Judges watch without reaction. They interrupt when necessary, not to scold, but to clarify. Their questions cut sideways through argument, exposing weak joints without raising their voices. Each interruption shifts the balance slightly, reminding everyone in the room that persuasion here depends on substance, not stamina. Outside, the messaging grows, more frantic. Allies appear on friendly networks, repeating talking points with increasing urgency. Social media surges with certainty, insisting outcomes are already decided. The performance. The ruling arrives without flourish, the way truth often does when it has already done the work. It reads like architecture, not drama, constructed to hold weight rather than win applause. Page after page, the language is calm, precise, unyielding. Claims are restated, evidence matched, contradictions aligned. There is no anger, no sarcasm, no moralizing. Only sequence. Only logic. Only consequence. The decision does not shout, it explains. It moves slowly, deliberately, tightening its frame until escape becomes impossible. Every assertion meets its mirror. Every defense meets its limit. By the time the final paragraph arrives, the outcome feels inevitable. Line by line, the ruling dismantles the mythology that confidence can substitute for consistency. Valuations are compared, not rhetorically, but mathematically. Statements given years apart are placed side by side, not to embarrass, but to test memory. Where numbers rise without explanation, the court asks how. Where explanations change, it asks why. The answers matter because they reveal pattern. Pattern becomes finding. Finding becomes conclusion. This is not punishment for ambition. It is accountability for misrepresentation. Not one mistake, but a system of them, repeated, normalized, defended until documentation removes doubt. Nothing here feels rushed. Everything feels earned, deliberate, final. When the ruling turns to penalties, the language remains surgical. Numbers appear not as symbols, but as consequences. Fines calibrated, restrictions imposed, oversight ordered. The court explains why each measure exists, how it corresponds to conduct, what it is designed to prevent. There is no theatrical flourish, only containment. A system correcting itself. The effect is sobering. This is not about humiliation. It is about restoring alignment between representation and reality. By the time the remedies conclude, the message is unmistakable. Power does not dissolve standards. Standards redefine power. The shockwaves hit before the ink feels dry. Social media ignites, not gradually, but all at once, as if the country had been holding its breath waiting for permission to react. Hashtags climb within minutes, some celebrating accountability, others framing collapse as conspiracy. Memes race ahead of context, compressing years of complexity into punchlines and accusations. Feeds refresh faster than facts can settle, and outrage competes with relief for oxygen. Markets respond with visible nerves. Analysts speak in careful tones about exposure, reassessment, uncertainty. Stock tickers dip, rebound, dip again, mirroring a national mood that can't decide whether this is disruption or correction. Investors don't argue ideology. They react to risk. And suddenly, the idea that branding could override documentation looks like a gamble no one wants to repeat. The tremor isn't catastrophic, but it's real, and it sends a message that consequences don't stay contained. Supporters move quickly to defense. Overreach becomes the word of the day. They warn of dangerous precedent, of power weaponized, of tomorrow's targets expanding. Their language is urgent, emotional, protective. Identity fuses with loyalty, and loyalty demands resistance. For them, the ruling isn't about fraud or standards. It's about survival, about preserving a story that feels inseparable from their own. The critics respond just as forcefully, but from the opposite direction. Overdue becomes their refrain. They point to timelines, to patterns, to years of unanswered questions. They resist triumphalism, framing the moment as correction rather than victory. Accountability, they argue, is not vengeance. It is maintenance. Their relief is tempered by realism. One ruling does not fix a system, but it can prove the system still breathes. Legal analysts step into the noise with quieter authority. They parse language, underline clauses, explain scope.